Hello everyone, and today I'm going to do a VR response to Sylvain's Deadly Sins, 7 decks for 7 deadly sins. Alright, so our first category today is a deck for Pride. So the Pride deck is being described as something that you bought for flexing or you use as a flex. And I definitely have one of those. So I have my very lucky hands on the indie version of our tarot, and I featured this in my last tag video that I did. And the reason why I needed this deck, well, felt like I needed this deck, you really only need one deck, but we're not going to start that fight right now, is that there were certain characters that just didn't make it in to the mass market that I really wanted. Like Hedy Lomar is a great example. Another one is I really wanted maybe Till Mobley to be in the deck, and there's a couple other figures that just didn't make it to the mass market that I really wanted to see in the deck. So this is my Pride deck, and I love this deck a lot. I don't really use it to read for clients or to read for other people. I use it more as like a bibliomancy type of thing because the guidebooks are so good. And I do have the mass market and the indie version because I did want both guidebooks. Okay. A deck that I only use for myself. So the deck that I only use for myself, and it's not really something that I sat down and decided, it just kind of happened that way. The deck I use just for me, my greed deck, is Tabula Mundi by Meleen. And this deck I like to use for myself because I just finished a huge deep dive into this deck with my tarot book club. And I finally got to see like all of the deep messages that are within this deck. And I finally reached a point with it where I get it and it gets me. So it's a wonderful deck. It doesn't pull the punches. It really gives it to you. So it's not a deck if you want a nice, simple answer. But I do love it because it just tells you what you need to know. All right, so the deck for Wrath. So I want to preface with, I love this deck, but it doesn't fit exactly into my model of a perfect deck for me. So I struggle with it a little bit. And that is a deck by Bakara Wintner. It is the Wayhome Tarot. And it accompanies her WTF is Tarot and How Do I Do It book that I love. And the issue I have with this deck is that everything in this deck is perfect except for the court cards. Like, I just can't get behind the silhouette thing. Like the moon, the lovers, everything. I love the minor arcana cards too. Like, they're perfect. I just can't get behind the silhouette thing. And I have friends who love the silhouettes, and I have friends who hate the silhouettes. It's just not my thing. Like, I can see how it works because it embodies, like, the feeling behind the quartz. But the quartz, I think, is something that a lot of people struggle with. And the fact that it's not showing, like, a clearly portrayed scene is what throws me. But the rest of the deck is just gorgeous. So that's why I would consider this a deck for Wrath, because it's just ever so close to being perfect for me, specifically. The deck itself is fine, as you can tell by my mincing at words here. I just don't like the quartz. All right, my deck for Envy. My Envy deck is a deck that I had to have because everyone else had it. And when I show you, you'll see exactly what I mean. So this is this deck is by Hildegard, and it is the Majestic Earth Tarot. It's by J.D. Hildegard Hinkel, and it's stunning. It's very hard, in my opinion, to put together a good found art deck. And this does it perfectly. I saw this one all over TarotTube, and I didn't get involved into TarotTube until about a year ago. So I missed out on a lot of the decks that came out in the year before and the couple of years before that. This is also just my favorite piece of art in general. So with this deck is I saw it and I kept seeing it and I accepted for the longest time that I'm just never going to have it. Same with the Tower of Delphi. Like, I've just accepted that that's not in the cards for me. No pun intended. But a couple of them went up for the second sale, and this is one of the seconds, and it's flawless. There's a little bit of cutting errors on some of them, like if you look ever so slightly super duper close at the bottoms of some of these, I can't even find any right now, then you'll see that some of the cutting was off. Like there's a little bit of the image below that's shown because it's just the process of cutting out cards from those giant sheets. So like that's why it was obviously considered a second printing, but it's beyond perfect for my intents and purposes. So I was really happy that I was, here we go. If you see at the very bottom, there's some show through of the card that would have been printed below. But for my purposes, it's perfect and it's stunning, and it's a deck that I had wanted for a really long time. So I'm happy that I'm able to use it. Okay. My Lust deck. So these are decks, multiple, that I love for the aesthetics. And I couldn't pick just one because we buy decks not just for their utilitarian purpose, at least I don't, but also because we like them and we think they're pretty. So I'll start with my first one. My first one is Terra Volatile, and it's amazing. I have the lighter cardstock, so I have the linen finish cards. Probably one of my favorite cardstocks. Like, it's up there with Pagan Otherworlds for me because it just shuffles like a dream. Like, it bends, it snaps, it does all of the things. Beautiful. And it's just a gorgeous deck too. The colors are beautiful. It gives me that medieval energy. Huge range of culture. It's just, and it has the additional suit of vessels that I personally don't use because I generally read this deck like an RWS style deck. The vessels are also beautiful. I just don't use them that often. Okay, moving along to my next deck for Lust is the Serpent and the Peacock Tarot. This one I feel like we didn't really talk about that much as a tarot community, and I wonder why, because it's awesome. This is made by Libra Moon. You can find this on her Etsy or on her website. And I'm a medievalist. I'm a music history person, and I really love early music and medieval music and art. So this was a natural fit. It's all based on art from medieval manuscripts, and you can see where swords and other things and wands have been added, but it's just such a good deck if you're into medieval art. One thing I will say is if you're someone who's really big on details, it is a little messy where the extra elements have been added in, but I don't notice it a ton. You notice it the most on the swords. Like the swords, because it's such a thin blade, you notice that they're kind of haphazardly put in there. But on the cups and the majors, it's beautifully done. I love this deck an awful lot. Last deck for Lust. I only picked 3. I'm proud of myself for only picking 3. Is Wayward Dark by Pixel Occult. So, I'm a pretty big Thoth nerd. And after I took the Tarot Mothership course with Tarot with Joe over on YouTube and Instagrams and all of the social places, after I took that class, I really fell in love with the Thoth system, but I wanted something that was a little different from the traditional Thoth to mix it up. And this is just so ooky, spooky, dark. It also has all of like the original Thoth elements that you're looking for. The keywords are all the same. And you really see those Golden Dawn Telema elements in here, which is really cool to see done well. So you can tell that Pixel Occult really knows their stuff and really knows the content of the Book of Thoth and like the Telemic teachings and all of that, because you can see it in the art, even though it's so radically different from the original deck. I think that's really excellent. I would put this in the same category as Tabula Mundi for me, in that it's just such a well done interpretation of the Thoth system, and I feel like that's hard to find. Okay, last category might, oh no, we're on Gluttony. So, deck for Gluttony, a deck that I really didn't need to have, but bought it anyways. We've all done it. You're in a metaphysical shop, you see a deck, you buy it because you're there. And that's nothing against this deck. I think this deck is amazing, because this deck was always on my list. I'm referring to the Indie edition. It was always on my list, but never quite made the top of the list because other things came out and I got distracted. So I told myself that once the Rock Pool edition came out, I was snagging it. So I gave myself permission preemptively. And then I saw it in my local metaphysical shop. And I said, well, it's going to have to come home with me because I told myself I could buy it. So I did. Did I need another deck? No. Had I just bought 4? Oh, yeah. Did I buy this one anyways? Also, yeah. So this, I think, is a really great example of a well-done mass market deck. Cardstock is beautiful, and these cards themselves are stunning. Ambi Sun did an amazing job with this deck, and it's nice to see an animal deck that isn't just North American animals. Like, Ambi Sun comes from Australia, so this represents their homeland. And it's just a well-done deck, and it's beautiful, it's gorgeous, and I'm traditionally not an animal deck person. I like me some people in a deck. I like seeing the emotions on the faces, etc., etc., etc. But this was just so well put together that I couldn't say no. Tuck this guy away. And now we're on to our last category, which is decks for Sloth. What I use when I'm not feeling like thinking, when I just want an answer, I want it now and I want it quick. I use these for client readings. I use these for events, especially events, because an event, you have a ton of people and not a ton of time. So you have to quickly roll through what you're doing. Usually, depending on the event, my readings end up being 10 minutes, maybe 12 minutes max. So I have to really get the information out there, and I don't have time to be futzing around with details, or in this system, they do this slightly different, and this is slightly different in this system because of this thing. So I like to stick with rudder weight clones, with art that doesn't look very threatening. And I like things where it looks friendly, but there still is a bunch of substance in there. So of course I have to have a classic RWS. This is a particularly great version. This has the traditional roses and lilies backs. It's by C in London, and it's available through drive-through cards. And it's the original scans by Saskia Jansen, which is really cool because she has an original, I believe it's the 1909 deck, because we have the PAM A, B, C, and D. This is where you really should go to a Melissa Zupan video who will show you all of the different kinds of RWS decks. She knows more than most people alive regarding the different versions. So if you're interested, pop on over to her channel. But it's exactly a one-for-one facsimile of the original RWS deck before it became the Rider Tarot. So we see that there's some areas of damage, and you can see the squiggly borders. I'm trying to find a nice one that's got some schmutz on it. And C in London cleaned it up a bit, but they're still facsimile images. So it's exactly what it looks like on Saskia's copy. Of course, now that I'm looking, everything looks immaculate. There's one in here that has a nice bit of schmutz on it. I like it because I like seeing the age in the images. It makes it feel like it's had a life. And it's also definitely not as garishly yellow. Here we go. So you see how like the edge looks a little deckled because of the age of the item. Like, I think that's just so neat. Yeah, it's a beautiful facsimile. And then the other deck that I use when I'm not feeling like thinking a ton is Ethereal Visions. So this is by Matt Hughes and Ethereal Visions Press, and it's just a beautiful rendition of the traditional images in a way that's pastel and gilded and just looks very welcoming and friendly. And you can see so much emotion in all of these faces. So I really like this one for clients. I really like this one for events, because I can immediately look at the image and just pick it out immediately. And I can do that with a bunch of my other decks as well. These are not the only 2 decks I have that I'm capable of doing that, but they're 2 decks that consistently just hit. And they don't look scary. So for a bridal shower or a wedding, I'm less inclined to take something like Wayward Dark or Tabula Mundi, because Thoth just looks a little scary. It's the truth. So for the uninitiated, which there's nothing wrong with being, if you don't know what some of the keywords mean or the subtleties there, wrath, cruelty, that's stuff that you maybe don't want to see at a baby shower. So something like Ethereal Visions or a traditional RWS or like Sasarai Budo, those are decks that I feel more comfortable bringing to clients because they just look a little softer and a little sweeter. But they still get all of the same messages and subtlety across. So these are my definitely more than 7 decks for 7 Deadly Sins. Have a good one.